While the days of Sega being a console manufacturer are far behind us, the days of them making good-ass games are anything but. Yeah, it's sad to see a pillar in the console wars I'd be supporting crumble as hard as it did, but having those games grace other platforms helps to lessen the blow. After all, now other members of the industry can experience what made me a Sega fan in the first place. And I've gotta say, us third-party Sega connoisseurs have been eating well, especially nowadays with the company making a real effort to give more love to its legacy IPs, more so than I wish others gave them credit for doing already. There's plenty of reason to celebrate, and what better way is there to do just down on the YouTubes than with a top 10? Subscribing to Zape Revolution? Oh, great idea! There's been no shortage of bangers from the company ever since the 6th generation, and narrowing it down to just a solid 10 was a lot harder than you'd expect. But I can never let you all down, so I did it, and we're gonna talk about it. As always, please just try to remember that this is my top 10, therefore this is not an opinionated video, but an objective, factual one. If you disagree with me, then you're just wrong. Sorry, I don't make the rules. So with that understood, and without any further ado, let's look towards the future, particularly the top 10 post-Dreamcast Sega games, starting with the future. Jet Set Radio Future is a game that's received a ton of praise, and as someone who finally played it, baby, yeah, it's earned. I'm not sure whether I prefer this or the original quite yet, but both games are nothing short of amazing anyway, so it's a win-win. The style across the two has always been one of my favorite aspects, and as a result, Future hasn't aged a day. Its trailblazing cell shading has been brought to a whole new level with the powerhouse that is the original Xbox, sporting distinct locales and eye-popping characters, all of which being strikingly designed. And that soundtrack was way ahead of its time because it still slaps like a kinky relationship. One of the best, according to some people, single-person soundtracks, but let's not sleep on all of the other independent artists and bands that helped to create the bombastic amalgamation that is the JSRF OST. And when you know it, on top of just sounding really good on its own, it complements the gameplay even better, which is great because simply moving in this game is such a thrill, with the skating, grinding, and newly implemented trick system feeling so tight and weighty this time around. There's so much room for self-expression, and with maps designed like these, there's a lot of literal room for just that too. The gameplay loop is more akin to an open world rather than the level select arcadey feel of the original, meaning that Tokyo Toe feels more like your playground than ever before, and there's a lot to be done. A good chunk of it is optional too, which I'm thankful for because a few of these maps went a bit overboard, and the reliance on combat in a few areas was a weird move. But how much can I really care when the baseline gameplay of this series, let alone this entry, is so fun? When it clicks, it's to a euphoric level and then some, so I can't stay mad. I'm just vibing, skating to my heart's content and tagging my territory with a ragtag group of troublemaking teens. What more could you ask for, really? I don't know if it was so good that we didn't need another one for 2 whole decades, but fear not, my friends, the rumors are true. Jet Set Radio Future is a banger, and only the start of this fantastic game list. The Sega Superstars or All-Stars games were a group of crossover titles that just kept getting better and better. And I'm using past tense because it's been 10 years since the last one, so I don't know if they dropped it or whatever, but I sure hope they haven't. After all, the last one was All-Stars Racing Transformed, a title that may just be the greatest racing game ever made. Well, that or Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, but we aren't talking about that game. We're talking about this one, and it's awesome. Regardless of its age, Transformed still feels so much better than nearly every other title that's come out in this genre before or since, with weighted vehicles, a real sense of speed, and crunchy sharp turns. That said, the name of the game and focus is quite literally transforming, with your vehicle being able to traverse not just the land but the sea and air, with track design taking full advantage of that very fact. Every course is dynamic, changing how you approach the many laps in masterful ways, sometimes even changing up how the laps play out mid-race. But the weight, handling, and pure sense of control you feel over your cars, planes, and boats assures you that your skill will be the ultimate tool that'll bring you out on top. There's a lot to learn here, but your improvement will yield immediately observable results, paving the way for races where the best player truly wins every time. With that emphasis on proper skill mastery, however, the game does become a harder sell to more casual multiplayer sessions in contrast to its stiffest competition. Not to mention the item selection is a bit weak and the roster is a noticeable step down from its predecessor, except for you Pudding, you can stay. But as someone who's played this game for years, it's definitely the racing game that feels more catered to my tastes. And since this is, well, my list, I tend to find myself enjoying it a lot. I love the deep cuts, all 3 racing types, and how much the game challenges me overall. It's not as easy to get a multiplayer session going, but it ain't impossible seeing as how this is a game worth learning, and I'm far from the only one who realizes that. Still waiting on a sequel to this in the style of a Sega crossover, by the way. Team Sonic Racing was cute, but All-Stars Racing Transformed is for the big kids, and I don't plan on taking my foot off the pedal anytime soon. See? I told you, we're still driving. We've been on a direct sequel hot streak so far, huh? Jet Set Radio, All Stars Racing, and now even Outrun. The arcade classic is a hell of a fun time that still holds up, but fellas, the sequel? Let how much I love the original emphasize this statement to the level I intend it to be at, but if I could never play it again and only this follow-up, I wouldn't bat an eye. Outrun 2, specifically its definitive edition, Outrun 2006 Coast to Coast, is freaking brilliant. The handling of every vehicle is pristine, and that drift mechanic, game changer. Coupled with this version's unique slipstreaming, making the traffic within these stages almost feel like mini puzzles to get the best possible time, God, driving feels like a dream. Something that goes for both courses, each with their own branching paths, settings, and challenges to boot. It's already double the content of the original game with zero compromises. Matter of fact, it might have tripled the content because this game is the physical manifestation of addiction. You can't just do one run through, drive through and be done with it. You have to come back for at least one more session. It remains a joy each time, while being somewhat therapeutic. I love driving and I love the beach, so hopping in this game for a joyride or two just feels so right to me. It was something I already loved doing with the original, but it's easier to become immersed this time around thanks to the gorgeous visuals, that vibrant color palette, and those jams both remixed from the original and unique to this entry. Blasting those tunes while my windows and possibly roof are all down. Oh, this is the dream, man. And funnily enough, it's not even like there's that much to this game. Outside of the main arcade mode, there's a cool mission mode to play through, I guess, but those bells and whistles feel superfluous. The #1 appeal of this game is enough to wring out hours of content alone, making for a great game that knows exactly what it wants to be and excels at it. Best driving game? Best driving game. And it's only at number 8! This list was hell to make, man! House of the Dead was one of my more recent Sega escapades, but man, am I mad at myself for not indulging in them sooner. These games are a treat. Some of the better ones were in the early pre-Dreamcast days, but the best one thankfully released after the fact, which is good news to me because I am dying to talk to you all about House of the Dead 4. The hoops I went through to play this game were excessive, and I can't say I ever thought I'd own 2, let alone 1 goofy light bulb controller, but I also can't say that the effort wasn't worth it. Everything earlier titles housed had been cranked up to 11, with the zombie density even reaching a point where the game could occasionally chug every now and then. Truly a sign of a 7th generation console game. But more than that, this bumps up the difficulty to make it one of the tougher entries of an already tough series, something that's manageable at all thanks to the many tools the game gives you along with the refined gameplay loop of past entries. This is the first one where you use an automatic as well as screen clearing grenades to help promote the crowd control necessary to beat this game. It's a natural progression of the previous titles while not becoming something mindless. The game still has plenty of thoughtful set pieces, with bosses especially being a real test of skill, and it's the first game where I felt they were mostly consistent, just 1 or 2 that I didn't care about, which is an area I've seen this series struggle with all the way up to this point. It's a blast from beginning to end, and by the time it came to the end, I was practically begging for more. Shoutouts to this game including the 2 House of the Dead 4 special stages, but even still, I just wanted more. Needless to say, I replayed this one a few times, and as if I needed more reason to do just that, let's not forget that this series, let alone this game, is best experienced with a partner in crime. Co-op exemplifies everything that makes this game work to another level entirely, from the action to the craziness all the way to that needlessly incredible soundtrack. I weep for the poor souls who've yet to play the games in this manner. They're unfortunately difficult to experience these days outside of the arcade just due to the consoles not really having the options to play them as intended, and even finding them in arcades has become a challenge in and of itself, which is a shame. But if you have the means to get these games, or at least the patience to get everything you need like I did, then this title at the very least is a must play. While this may border the lines between being a Sega game and an indie one, I'm counting it because the company still owns the IP and it's my list. Therefore, I will literally do whatever I want. Who knows? Project Crosstone features Sega characters. Maybe that'll end up on the list. Anyway, yeah, number 6 is Streets of Rage 4. It sure took its sweet-ass time getting here, but it was more than worth the wait, trumping not only its previous entries, but every other game in its genre. You know what? Yeah, I'm doubling down on that, because even with all of the other great titles that rock the beat-em-up belt, there's just something about this one. Honestly, Streets of Rage has always had that immediate enjoyability factor, featuring gameplay so instantly fun for anyone while throwing in a few techs and mechanics to make it worth learning as well. Take that all a step further, and you've essentially got Streets of Rage 4, only this time alongside levels that are so so much more dynamic and fun to go through than the high bar its predecessors established back on the Genesis. Fighting is crunchy and fast-paced, the game puts you in a bunch of fun, interesting scenarios to bust out your moves, and while bosses are harder than ever, they're also more fun than ever, more satisfying to overcome than ever, and you'll want to overcome them at all because the game feels so good to play. Just as a warning, because of all this and that attractive runtime, you may find yourself playing the game more than you were expecting. I know I have. I've run through it so many times by now and it never burns me out, maintaining that temptation to do it all over again. It's dangerous. And as if I needed more reasons to play, just about every character from the series and all of their alterations are unlockable. Oh, what's that? You need another reason to play the game again? Guess what has co-op? And up to 4 players? Now that's what I'm talking about. I've done full team playthroughs multiple times at this point, the game never failing to strike a chord with anyone, and everyone can agree on one thing: it kicks ass. Keep in mind, all of this isn't even mentioning the visual feast you become well acquainted with at this point just through the video alone, and even more so, that soundtrack, oh my god! Best one on the entire list, with nearly 2 hours of techno EDM bliss going perfectly with the butt-kicking mayhem. Yuzo Koshiro, Yoko Shimomura, and T-Lopes all in the same game? Relax! This goes without saying, Streets of Rage is back, baby. Never been better, too. Puyo Puyo and I have had a rocky history, to say the least. Straight up, I used to hate these games, but somewhere along the line, they finally clicked, and Puyo Puyo Tetris is the culprit. A fantastic game that we're not gonna talk about. Instead, we'll be discussing its sequel, because despite it not being as big of a leap as it could have been, I can't deny that there's just more to it and the slightest bit of extra polish to make it the superior entry. I know I haven't felt the urge to go back to the original, which I think says it all. Plus Sonic's here. I love that guy. Either way, combining Puyo Puyo, a game created by the devil himself, with a far more approachable Tetris helped me to further comprehend the other side of the coin I struggled with so much. It showed me that it was possible to love both, and now that I do, I can't put this game down to save my life. Puyo Puyo and Tetris may not be that well balanced against one another, particularly on a higher play field, but they're so fun to play simultaneously that I have a hard time caring too much. Puyo and Tetris, great when separate, but when they combine, they make the morning time epic. Anytime, really. And just about any mode at that. Well, any mode that isn't named Party or Fusion, but don't count combining the two games into one mode out altogether, because Swap is insane. This is where boys turn to men, and the controlled chaos that ensues switching between the two gameplay styles back and forth, along with the clutch wins that come with it, this is the clear star of the show. And all the factors that pulled me in even while I was struggling to wrap my head around the game, such as that distinct art style, eye-popping spells, catchy music, and pitch-perfect sound design, all of which heightened in this sequel, only served to act as bigger distractions from the flaws that may or may not be there. I couldn't tell you, I'm having way too much fun to notice. The game just feels right, and as a result, I played it for hours, with that playtime continuing to climb into somewhat embarrassing territory, because guess what has multiplayer? I've somehow gotten my IRL buddies hooked on this game, with online friends getting me on the hype train in the first place, so I'm incredibly lucky to have both local and online sessions of either one of the two featured puzzle games, or the best mode that houses a back and forth between the two. Matches are so hyped, dynamic, and electrifying. No wonder people consider this a fighting game. Unlike fighting games, however, I'm actually competent at this and can genuinely have some fun. What a concept! Add this to the list of Zephyr Revolution character arcs. I'm a huge Puyo Puyo fan now, and I'm glad that if any game were to have converted me, it was this one, because it just led me to a game that was even better. Score! The Panzer Dragoon series was one of Sega's later IPs within its console lifespan, but it very quickly soared to become one of their greatest. Most of the games lived and died on the Saturn, but just like Jet Set Radio, its latest entry made it on the original Xbox. And, once again, just like Jet Set Radio, it's so damn good. Panzer Dragoon Orta makes the original and its sequels vie. I see you comments, I got it right this time. Both look like tech demos. Keep in mind, this is coming from someone who loves those games. It's just that everything about them has been enhanced to an almost unrecognizable level. The captivating visuals, immersive world building, liberating flight controls, and nail-biting action have been polished and improved to a T, making for the best entry in the series, at least when it comes to the rail shooters. Saga's a bit of an unfair comparison, but even then it's given a run for its money. Having a bunch of different modes to switch your dragon between paves the way for a larger pool of enemy variety, consequently raising the challenge factor from tough to relentless. I was taken very off guard by how hard this game ended up being, even on subsequent playthroughs, sometimes taking nearly an hour to defeat certain bosses. This is a game you have to learn and overcome through your own persistence and skill, otherwise you simply will not beat it. That, or I guess you could put it on easy mode, but I wouldn't be surprised if a substantial challenge for those who'd even pick an option like that would still be prevalent. A sentiment that I love because despite that, nothing in this game feels unfair or impossible. Every single enemy has a pattern to learn and a flow to be understood, with each style of my dragon offering plenty of tools to use at a moment's notice, meaning every time I won as a result of getting good, I felt amazing, and that required laser focus helped immerse me deeper into this world I simply can't get enough of. Environments are more breathtaking than they've ever been, and there are so many ways to go about them even on the rails thanks to the branching paths, adding gobs of replay value to the overall package. Plus, 4 games deep with all the crazy lore and intrigue I've garnered, you're damn right I was invested in every single cutscene. Saga left this world off on such an interesting note, and our new protagonist Orta was yet another excellent lead to walk beside. This game felt so rewarding to experience as someone who played the series in order, whether I was visiting familiar locales, seeing the fates of old friends, or being brought deeper into an overarching narrative I adore. Something that rang true both through the main campaign and extra content, fleshing out this living, breathing world more than I could have ever anticipated. Can you believe this game has the audacity to even end? Well, that was my sequel. Running back through it over and over, seeing the sights and sharpening my skills in the process has never felt better than it does here. This may be yet another represented genre whose best game resides on the list. That or Sin and Punishment Star successor, I can't really decide between the two, but regardless, Orta truly perfects the Panzer Dragoon rail shooting formula. A high caliber all in its own right. Ever since falling in love with the original, one game I've never seemed to be able to get off of my mind is Catherine. And lucky for us, Sega bought Atlas, so I've got an excuse to talk about it. Even luckier, they made an updated version of the game titled Catherine Full Body, and it's easily what I consider to be its definitive edition. One that definitely earns its M rating, as this is, like my friend Tanuki puts it, a game for adults, if you will. Lots of mature talking points with our strictly grown-up cast, all surrounding the complicated emotion we refer to as... In fact, that's the dead center of this game and its many elements, dealing with the complications that surround the feeling, its many positive and negative forms, as well as how others from different walks of life view it, paving the way for truly thought-provoking conversations and dialogue. All of this ends up hitting harder and harder the older I get, helping in making the game so inescapable from my subconscious, but it's so gosh darn good that I don't mind. I love just about every scene, and all of the characters, at the very least, are entertaining. I say this because many of them are purposefully unlikable, which I actually found super refreshing. I think we live in a time where even fictional characters are afraid of getting canceled, so I love seeing such a raw cast that truly says whatever's on their mind regardless of how politically incorrect they may or may not be. If anything, it leads to conversations on more uncomfortable subject matter, and I can't help but respect the game for truly diving into it all. Matter of fact, with all this talk about the storytelling aspects and moments you'll spend in the real world, it's easy to forget that there's a whole other half to this game in the dream world that consists of the more fantastical elements and puzzle-solving gameplay. But against all odds, this strange pairing works wonders and helps balance each other out. Climbing up Vincent's dream towers never failed to be tense all throughout, but the mechanics are sound and the puzzles never have just one solution. Good thing too, because they are hard as hell, yet super rewarding to learn and overcome, fitting right into Sega's catalog like a glove. This, along with the rest of the top 3, is an all-time favorite of mine. It's been like that ever since I fell for its original PS3 release, and I love that it hasn't stopped. There's so much about it, and it's so bold in all it tries to do. Truly a one-of-a-kind game, and I really need to dedicate an entire video to it at some point. I hope this is okay for now, at least. No, by the way, Catherine with a C is the best, proving that my love for toxic girls is no longer a joke. And yes, that was necessary for the video. Moving on. Oh yeah. Oh hell yeah. This game had no business being as good as it is, but with the already rock solid foundation of the one that started it all, I guess there really was nowhere to go from the peak of gaming than to the stars themselves. Super Monkey Ball 2, no joke, is a borderline masterpiece. That sentence may sound ridiculous for such a silly little Scrimblow game, but for those who played it, you all know exactly what I mean. The physics and charm from the original are all here and as incredible as they were, but the level design, gimmicks, and puzzle solving on top of more precision-based stages help to refine the experience to as high a degree as this game achieves. Every level is different and the difficulty is constantly ramping, with some of the later stages seeming straight up impossible. But speaking as someone who's personally played through every single floor, they're all doable, and those later ones make you feel like a god once you've overcome them. Except for the spider stage. That one sucks. But those later floors, especially everything the story mode's final world has to offer, are all so fun to figure out and get through. No, yeah, this game has a story mode, with cutscenes, dialogue, the works. And trust me, it's as ridiculous and amazing as it sounds, having this hilarious charm to it, seemingly taking itself so seriously with me loving every second. It's impossible to tire of too, as I've played through it an unhealthy amount of times while doing the same with challenge mode, maybe even more. I mean, how could I not with such an imaginative, fast-paced, addicting gameplay loop? And don't even get me started on the multiplayer. Too late, I'm starting! Every single mode outside of the story can be done with friends, and that's such a special lost artifact of gaming. Tackling these incredibly designed floors with pals, putting your brains together to come up with new ways to beat them, and just having a fun time with the charming title at hand is so good. The game's simple enough to grasp that anyone can learn it, yet its alluring nature makes everyone want to get good at it too. And if you somehow get tired of the main mode, which you won't, but let's just say that you might, you have all of these mini games to get invested in, which are all a great time, some of which even reach the quality levels of the main game. The content is bursting through the seams, making for the ultimate party game, nay, the ultimate video game. A statement so bold, yet so true that it begs the question, Mr. Evolution, with something as good as this, what could have possibly beaten it? My friends, let's find out. Right after these honorable mentions. If you couldn't already tell, this ended up being a stacked list, so I hope you can now see that Sega's more than just its big hitters. In fact, I wanted to use this video to highlight that very fact, so forgive me, but I decided not to include Persona 5 Royal. We all know it's amazing, and it could have potentially gotten the #1 slot, but I just didn't find that satisfying. Don't take this the wrong way though, it's a 100+ hour epic that ended up meaning so much to me that I bawled my eyes out when it ended. Its influence is still felt to this day, and the game deserves all of the praise it's gotten. We just won't be contributing to that. Today, at least. And the same goes for Sonic. I want you all to know that there are more Sega games than what the Blue Blur has to offer. Believe me though, I'm very much a fan of his outings, with Mania arguably being the best. A perfect love letter to the franchise's best era and a phenomenal game in its own right, Mania is a celebration worth celebrating, and I'm glad that all of this time later it hasn't lost its luster. Yakuza 0 is under the same category of Sega games that already get a ton of praise, but at one point this was actually on the list. After a while though, it just didn't feel right since I've yet to finish it, so in another timeline where I did, it'd probably crack the top 10. Although rest assured, from what I've played, the game's awesome, with it seamlessly blending its serious dramatic story into the silly subplots that are equally as investing. I'm really excited to see how it all comes together. I wasn't too big on it once I finished, but I've since been warming up to Valkyria Chronicles just a tad bit. I love the look, and its approach to tactical combat is unique, if a bit rough around the edges. Perhaps if it were a bit more refined, we could have something really cool on our hands. By the way, does this battle system look familiar to anyone else? Anyway. You could basically take most of what I said for the sequel and drop it right here, but like stated previously, the second game just has a bit more to give it the slightest edge. While the roster isn't as big and the presentation isn't quite as expressive, the core game is just as great and you can't go wrong either way. If anything, it has the superior story mode since the characters know when to shut up and actually let me play the video game. If you couldn't tell, I decided to go with one game per franchise for the sake of variety, so unfortunately only one monkey could be balling this time. While the sequel definitely perfected the formula, as we say in these parts, the original was what established it, and it holds up exceptionally well. With physics that feel just right on top of arguably faster paced gameplay, with you truly being able to get right into these stages, they got the series right from the jump. A ground-up remake of the game that started it all, the improvements, additions, and tweaks helped to make a tighter, longer, and even better experience than that first game I loved so much. And hey, that's why Valkyria Chronicles combat looked so familiar. It's based off of this series' arms system, and I love it oh so much. Playing this game back-to-back with the original only goes to emphasize that fact even further. It really was such a great direction for this series to go. But we could talk about that all day if we aren't careful. Sakura Wars has a way of making me go on tangents as a result of how much I love those games. I mean, just within Hot Blood alone, could you imagine if they took the refinements made in that game even further? Why, that'd be amazing! Especially if it were its own original story. You could raise the cast to an unthinkable quality standard, make all the events that much more engaging, and the gameplay, oh man! ARMS combat is already great, but what if we took it to the next level? What if we made something that gave even my favorite strategy RPGs a run for their money? Why, something like that sounds an awful lot like my favorite post-Dreamcast Sega game, Sakura Wars So Long, my love. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a motherforkin' winner, and I'm pissed. I'm pissed that we had a game this good readily available in English on the highest selling console of all time, and none of you assholes told me. I've fallen in love with Sakura Wars as a whole, and So Long, my love is, in my eyes, the best of the bunch, taking everything that worked about past games and punching them up to 11. It's an ambitious title, and its shortcomings all come as a result of that unbridled ambition. Truth be told, this is a flawed game, arguably being among the most flawed out of the entire list, but I don't want to talk about any of its faults, to be perfectly honest honest with you. If anything, the fact that it tries so hard in all it sets out to do is insanely admirable, and it just ends up shining that much brighter when things come together, which obviously given its placement happens way more often than not. While it may not be the most dramatic story in a series that refers to itself as dramatic action, the feel-good moments alongside the more serious ones help to create a tonal dissonance unique to it and it alone. And with such a laser focus on its cast, this group of goofballs ended up becoming one of my favorite groups in all of gaming. There are zero misses within this troupe, all led by one of the most frustratingly lovable male leads ever. He deserves the best girl Gemini. They all deserve each other. Something that the game seemingly knows too, because the social elements are so clean this time around, with interactions rarely, if ever, having a correct answer. The entire series, let alone this one game, does such a great job with giving the player freedom to properly express themselves, forcing you not to pursue a golden path where everyone falls in love with you, but to get closer to the characters you find yourself clicking with. And as a result, there's a lot of stuff to discover in this game, and even more you'll miss, but with that attractive runtime and the game offering ways to alleviate tedium on subsequent playthroughs, replay value is through the freaking roof. Above everything though, the combat system is stellar. Map design is wicked good, always changing things up and never failing to add new gimmicks or twists to keep level design entertaining. At the same time, they never compromise or reliance on emphasis on true strategy, rewarding you for fighting smarter, not harder. Beating everyone on screen more often than not isn't the answer and can be avoided, with the game rewarding you not just by making missions go by faster, but sometimes with even more immediate gameplay-centric responses. I wouldn't dare spoil them all here, as they add so much to the experience while in the moment, earning their strategy RPG classification. After all, Sakura Wars is more than an excuse to make googly eyes at cute anime girls. At its core, it really is a sound tactical game, with this 5th installment pushing that the furthest it's ever been with bigger and better maps, tons of mechanics, and a worthy team by your side. This game is mint, and however you can go about playing it, I implore you to do so, whether you've gone through another entry or not. Heck, it was my gateway into the series, and even after coming back to it following a journey through the other entries, it remains a cut above the rest, and is my pick for the company's best work after their last dream. A title that should mean something at this point, because as we've seen, Sega has been popping off as a third-party developer. RPGs, platformers, action games, racing games, shooters, the list goes on and on. There's so much more to the company than you might realize outside of its biggest, most prominent hitters. In fact, I'm sure that there are plenty I've missed, so I'd love to hear you all's top 10 Sega games that were released after the Dreamcast. And I hope that we can spread the word of how much magic this company continues to pour out even after their first-party days. Or, at the very least, that you all have finally been convinced to play Sakura Wars, baby! The games are so good, gosh darn it, play them, please! Just play them, for the love of God!
燃える頬に涙のしぶき振り払い立ち上がろうまぶた閉じて